Namaste and good evening. It's a great privilege to introduce the main speaker and the chair of the session. Spanning 790 pages, starring 1,300 species of birds, including variants, and featuring 300 odd contributors, a pictorial field guide to birds of India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh by our chair Bikram Grewal is a tome that all of us who are fascinated with birds should possess. Sri Bikram Grewal grew up in the dense evergreen forests of India's northeast, where he first developed his love for birds. He gave up a full-time, very successful publishing career to devote his time to the conservation of Indian wildlife, especially working on rare birds. He now serves as a trustee of several wildlife-based institutions and also acts as a consultant on ecotourism to several Indian states. He is currently helping the government of Nagaland set up a 5-year biodiversity conservation program. He has written over 30 books on birds of the subcontinent. His other books cover diverse subjects ranging from travel to the joys of collecting natural history art. He helped conceive the Birds of India website, a must-see for all of us, which is now the biggest birding site in India and is ranked amongst the top 10 birding sites in the world. He is trustee of the Wildlife Preservation Society of India. He was awarded the Lifetime Award for spreading awareness about birds and conservation in India. Uh, uh, we're very privileged to have him with us, and we are also grateful that he accepted this invitation at very short notice. And we would like to hear from him in his very forthright manner about birds and their conservation in India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Could you put on the first page of my slide? You know, I want to register a rather half-hearted protest about birds in India. The trouble with birds, though we have close to 1,350 species of birds in India, the number varies depending on which book you use. But birds are really, really low down in the ladder of wildlife watching. Of course, the top is the tiger, which is a sexy animal. It takes away 90% of the government grants. As it is, the Ministry of Forests and Environment has absolutely no money, and what little it has is taken away by big cats, what we call the big cat hegemony. And then there are poor butterflies, trees, birds, frogs get almost nothing. But yet, suddenly in the last 10 years, we have seen this huge growth in the study of birds. And there are birding tours. Almost every city has a birding club. It's the cheapest hobby you can have. You don't have to spend money. You can sit on your roof. You can sit in your garden if you have one. You can walk on the street. You can go to a local park and watch birds. So suddenly there have been this huge rise in the number of people watching birds. And it's very, very encouraging. You know, most cities, if it's a big city like Delhi, we have 4 or 5 birding clubs. And every weekend, there are 4 or 5 trips, guided trips by seniors, by experts, taking other amateur bird watchers along with them and teaching them the joys of birding. And this is something that is now growing. There's huge potential as a tourism tool. I know of at least 50 people who specialize just in birding tours. You see, what happens is if you go to a park, to a game park, let's say you're going to Kaziranga or to Covid, the mindset of most people is tiger dekhna hai. If you see the tiger, the trip is over. If you don't see a tiger, then the trip is a failure. But the forest has so much more. It has plants, it has birds, it has butterflies, it has fossils, it has fungi, it has frogs, it has amphibians, it has reptiles, but none of them, including the guides, know anything about it. So that is a contradiction. While birding is going up, bird tourism also is going up, but the pressure is still on the poor tiger. Now, I don't have very much time. I actually have only 20 minutes for what I would say an hour and a half talk. So I'm going to quickly take you through certain types of birds. Now, in India, at the start of the century, we lost two birds. We lost two birds. We lost the pink-headed duck, which is on the top left, which was last seen in 1936 by C.M. Inglis in Darbangas, never been seen. On the right is what we call the Himalayan quail, earlier popularly known as the mountain quail. This has not been seen for 200 years. I think the last time it was seen was in 1787 or something near Sher Ka Danda in Nainital. There's only known from 7 or 8 skins in the world, truly, but I still live in hope that one day somebody among us will rediscover this bird. But by the same token, we have recently discovered a brand new bird to science, and that's the lower bird, which is called the Bougainvillea chikla. It was found by my friend Ramana Atre in the Eagle Nest area. It's still very little known. I think only 26 specimens have been found. There is very little protection. The government is really not interested, but it has built up local tourism. Then we have lost birds, like the Siberian crane. The Siberian crane, which is to come in the hundreds to India, to Bharatpur in particular. I myself have seen, up to 40. It stopped coming since 2000. The money bush quail, which is on the right, hasn't been seen for 40 years, hasn't been ever photographed. This bird has never been photographed. But the happy story is that the Jordan's Corsair was refound by Bharat Bhushan of the BNHS. Unfortunately, for the last 5 or 6 years, it hasn't been seen. I hope it's not disappeared for the second time. The forest owlet, Athene blueti, was found again after almost 100 years by Pam Rasmussen, and is now being seen. Can I have the next slide? We're really running short of time, so I'm going to really hurry up. So to give you an idea of the kinds of birds we get, the most colorful and my favorite birds are the tragopans. We get 4 out of the 5 tragopans that exist in this country in India. Some are rarer. The western tragopan, which is found in western part of India, around the Great Himalayan National Park, is one of the most difficult birds to see. The Temix tragopan, extreme East Arunachal, difficult to see. Satyr tragopan, not so bad. And the Blitz tragopan is very, very difficult in Nagaland. But you can see these are big game birds, colorful, beautiful, stunning. Next. Then we have the pheasants. You have the blood pheasant. You have the cheer. You have the koklas. These are fabulous species of game birds, galliforms. But again, the greatest threat is hunting, and more importantly, loss of habitat. Now the cheer pheasant, you have to go really far and hope that somewhere near Sattal, near Mussoorie, near Nainital, you might be able to see it. Next, please. I continue with, you see the green peafowl as opposed to the Indian peafowl has been exterminated from this country, extirpated from this country. Mrs. Hughes pheasant, though it's a state bird of some of the northeastern states, it hasn't been seen. So all under pressure, the pheasants. First hunting, more importantly, loss of habitat. Next, please. Sclatus monal. These are fabulous birds. The Sclatus monal is found only in Arunachal. It has a white tail as opposed to the common monal, which is the left. The only place you can really see it is Mayodhya Pass. One every 15 trips, you might get a glimpse. The masked finfoot on the right bottom, standalone bird, amazing bird, hasn't been seen in India for the last 30, 40 years. Authentically seen, which means with a photograph. But in neighboring Bangladesh, you can see it relatively easy. The white-winged wood duck on the bottom left, 400 left. Dubious distinction of being India's rarest duck. Nameri, Manas, 3 or 4 places in the entire world. Like I said, less than 400. Next, please. Next. You know, nobody realized, you missed one, I think. You missed the woodpeckers before that. Can you go back? Yeah. We have amazing woodpeckers in this country, some 30, 40 of them. From the smallest, the white-browed piculet, which is less than sparrow size, to the great slaty, the Sindh woodpecker. One record from India post-independence, recently, next to the Pakistan. How many people have seen the bay woodpecker or the pale-headed woodpecker? These are bamboo birds. How many people know that there's so many species? England has, Europe has 3 or 4 species. We have 30 plus. Why should there not be bird tourism in India? Next, please. Next. Same with the kingfishers. The central Blythe's kingfisher, twice the size of a common kingfisher. A handful of photographs exist. Ruddy kingfisher, monsoon visitor. Oriental dwarf kingfisher, monsoon visitor. We have so many, we have 10, 12 of them, as opposed to the common woodpecker, common kingfisher of Europe. We have to exploit this whole wealth of avifauna that we have with us. Next, please. Next. You know, hornbills hunted for the feathers, for tribal ceremonies. We have the rarest hornbill in India, the Narcondam hornbill, found only in the island of Narcondam in the Andaman Seas. You can't even visit it. Austin's brown. These are amazing, amazing birds where everybody looks, but the hornbills need tall trees to nest for the safety of the nest. Today, what has disappeared first from our forests are tall trees, because the tallest, biggest trees fetch the most amount of money in the black market. These are the gardeners, they're the malis of the garden. They eat a fruit, drop the seed somewhere else, and repopulate the forest. But the numbers are going down. And with their numbers is the ability to repopulate a forest. Nobody's taking it seriously. The government is not taking it seriously. What can an NGO do? Is it the job of NGO to protect a hornbill, or is it the forest department's job? Somebody has to ask this basic question. Next, please. I'm rushing through this. Trogons. The Ward's trogon on the right. One of the rarest birds, one of the most beautiful birds. Again, northeast. Red-headed trogon, Malabar trogon. These are sentinels of the forest. You can build a birding business around trogons, if anybody was interested. Next, please. Cuckoos, emerald cuckoo, violet cuckoo, Hodgson's hawk cuckoo. Who's heard of these birds? But people will come from abroad to see these birds. We as Indians are just not interested. Next. We're already running late, so I don't even want to talk about owls. The Andaman Nicobars have their own set of owls. The eastern grass owl, one of the rarest owls in India. But with pesticide, cutting down of grasslands, grasslands is supposed to be wasteland in the eyes of the powers. They're losing their habitat. Next, please. Perhaps the saddest story of all of them is the bustards, the great Indian bustard, reduced to, I would think, less than 100. First waiting in the departure ground. It'll be the first bird that goes extinct in our life. Is two congeners, the lesser florican and the Bengal florican, less than 400 each. But with each sad story, there's a happy story. I've had to mix up my slides. So, there is, if you look at the bottom left, it's the Amur falcon. It's an amazing painting by John Gould. It comes for a period of about 10 days to Nagaland, where it congregates over the Doyang River. The local fishermen put up nets and on an average catch between 12 and 16,000 birds a day, which means during the migration period of 15 days, the migration takes place only one way. Only when it's going to Africa, but when it goes back to Amur, it doesn't come through India. So the migration takes place October, November. When it comes in the millions, the birds are not killed, because if they are killed, putrefaction will start. So they're injured, wings broken and kept. We have managed to stop that. This is the only success in biodiversity in India that I know about. We're talking about the vultures. You know what happened in the 90s? The population of vultures in India went down by 90%, right? They blamed it on diclofenac. Then it took 5 years for the government to stop the sale of diclofenac. But you come with me within 1 kilometer where I'm sitting, I'll show you 6 centers where you can buy diclofenac. They're slowly making a comeback, but it's a long, long way to go. Next, please. Next. Next. Herons. The white-bellied heron, seen only from Namdapa and better seen in Bhutan. The greater Atchison reduced to less than 500 in the world, of which 250 are in the Guwahati dump. Chinese pond heron, we don't even know. Goliath heron, we do not know. These are birds. We don't care. Next. Next. Next, please. The pittas. In India, we had the hooded pitta, the Indian pitta. Then we added the mangrove pitta, and now we've added the blue-wing pitta from Narcondam Islands. These are ground birds that travel. They breed north and live in the south. It's an amazing bird called Navrang in Hindi. Enough to start a business and sustain it, just the pittas. Next, please. Have you heard of the green kokwa or the purple kokwa? Two amazing birds. Again, unfortunately, confined only to the northeast, but it's there. How many of people really know about it? And how many of us really care? Next, please. I'm sorry after rushing through this because I have only 5 minutes. Wonderful birds. The forktail. The white-crowned forktail bird of the northeast. Black-backed, slaty-backed, little, river-dwelling. I mean, just seeing one of these makes your day. Next, please. How many of you know about nuthatches? They're very, very rare nuthatches. The beautiful nuthatch, which is the largest. Then there is chestnut-vented nuthatch, which is Sitta nagaensis, the only nuthatch named after a state. The Kashmir nuthatch, the spotted creeper on the right, which is not exactly a nuthatch. We used to see it all the time when we were young. Now we have to go all the way to Tal Chapar and hope that we have a 3% chance of seeing it. Where have all these birds gone? Have they gone because of a negligence? Has it gone because the habitat has been destroyed and nobody's caring about it? You know, when China killed off all its sparrows, they had to bring them back because they couldn't sit. The mosquitoes had taken over. Next, please. Next. The spotted laughing, the laughing thrushes, the garrulaxes. They're called laughing thrushes because they have a lovely thing. Next, please. We have many, many varieties. First, they were shot for food. They're still shot in food for Nagaland, Manipur, Arunachal. But the forests could sustain the killing. Today, the food trade in the Northeast goes to feed Assam, which the forest cannot handle. As it is, they're under pressure with human cultivation. So, next, please. Next. Prinias, wren babblers, these are birds that they can't fly. They can't fly. So they become species of their own. In recent years, we have had the Naga wren babbler, we had the Mishmi wren babbler, we have had the Chinnu. These were all broken down. These are species because they have to hang around in a very small area. So they can't go. And so they develop their own, uniqueness. Many we have in India. Next, my favorite birds. Next, please. Next. Scimitar babblers. Many scimitar babblers. Next, please. Many parrotbills. The most amazing family. So many of them, so many different varieties. Mostly bamboo, other than the black-breasted, which is a reed bird, but mostly bamboo dependent. Now the government of India has said that the bamboo is what you call a forest product. So anybody can get it. They have declared bamboo forests as forest products. So the habitat will go. Who will weep other than you and me? Nobody. Nobody cares. Nobody even knows about it. Next, please. Next. Sunbirds. The most colorful birds. The prettiest. All of you have seen the purple sunbird. But we have another 10, 12 others. From rare ones found in the Andaman Islands, found in the Northeast, found in North Bengal. They and the flower peckers, amazing, amazing variety of small birds. We as bird watchers see a flower pecker or see a not so common, but our days are made. Next, please. Next. Next. Yeah. Grosbeaks. I'm only giving you a smattering of the 1350. And with that, I've done this birds. I'm sorry, this would have taken me an hour and a half to explain the whole geography to you, but I see that I've already invited now the rest of my colleagues and come up. And the first, we'll talk about a very interesting subject, which is elephant corridors. Now, elephant corridors, one of the greatest man-animal conflicts that are taking place are not tiger and man, but elephant and man. And I have known her, and she's done amazing work in trying to sort out elephant character, to identify. May I ask you to come and join us? And then we'll get Biplab after that.
Thank you, Bikram sir. It's an honor to be a
Don't
part
call
of
me
the.
sir, but it's great, it's wonderful. And
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to hearing about what all progress has been made in this wonderful thing.
thank you, sir. So I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, can you see?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it was a fascinating presentation on birds, sir. So I'm just going to take shift the focus a bit towards elephants, towards a project which we are running from the Wildlife Trust of India, which is Rite of Passage for Elephants, to secure connectivity, to secure corridors for elephants.
Upasana, let me just
We all know what elephants are, but
intervene for 2 minutes
yeah,
just to tell you
sorry,
I have
sir.
about 10, 12 minutes.
Yes,
Okay. So keep it within that.
yeah, okay. Thanks. Yeah, okay. So now elephant is an animal which is in this land of contradiction. It means different things to different people. It's an object of worship for all of us because we worship the Lord Ganesha. It's a target for hunters. It's a burden to the people who coexist and live with them. It's a companion of mahots. And in the older days, it used to be pride of the kings. But most importantly, it's a keystone species. That is, it is extremely important for the ecosystem to flourish and for other animals, the whole biodiversity to thrive. Now, how do we define an elephant? Usually we use 4 words to define an elephant. And if we understand these 4 words, we will understand why an Asian elephant or any elephant, why an elephant needs what it needs. It is large, it's a mega herbivore, so it's obvious that it needs a lot of food and water and other resources which are very important for its survival. It's highly social because these animals, they move in families, they have a very tight social structure. They're intelligent because they have a very good memory. They remember their migratory routes, and they're nomadic. That is, they have to keep moving from one place to another. They have to keep moving from one forest to another for their survival. It's enough has been said about the ecological importance of elephants time and again. I'm just going to re-emphasize that by saying that elephants are the architects of the forest. They create clearings in the forest which benefits a whole lot of different other species. They are great seed dispersers. Their dung, it provides nutrition for other plants and animals. They provide water in times of drought. The elephants, they access water by digging holes, which benefits other wildlife. So basically, they're engineers of the forest. So where are these elephants? Where were these elephants earlier and where are they now? So Asian elephants in the past, they ranged over a vast area, that is from the Tigris and Euphrates in the West Asia to Southeast Asia. Now their present distribution is confined to 13 countries of Asia with a population of close to 50,000 as per the latest records given by the Asian Elephant Specialist Group. And in India, they're restricted to the 4 regions which I've mentioned in the map, with the current population being close to 30,000. The population has been more or less stable over the last decade. But important thing to note is that India, the population in India, it forms 58% of the global Asian elephant population, which means that India has the highest number of Asian elephants, the wild Asian elephants. Now, in India, it's spread across 30 elephant reserves, 10 elephant landscapes, and 14 states. Now, while this appears to be a vast territory, it needs to be taken into consideration that elephant reserves, they are not a legal entity. So they have areas of human use and habitation within them, which practically means that a large chunk of the country's elephant habitat is unprotected and susceptible to encroachment, or probably already in use by humans. So these are some of the usual scenes you might come across from elephant landscapes in the country. And we have a growing population of 1.3 billion people now, with the elephants distributed in patchy landscapes and people sharing the same landscape. The crux of the problem is one that affects all kinds of wildlife in our country, that is land. Because ultimately it boils down to the requirement for land. So you can see these kind of situations arising more common now, where elephants are killed because of poisoning or electrocution or coming in encounter with people almost on a daily basis. Habitat loss and fragmentation in the elephant landscapes have been a great cause for reduction in their habitats, the area which is available to them, highways which have bisected through the forests, creating further fragmentation, railway tracks which have already been there now, places where they are being expanded or they are being converted into different, different new ones which are being coming up. So these are actually all leading to further fragmentation of elephant habitats. Train hit has been a major concern for elephant conservation in the country. And as you can see, from 1987 to July 2020, close to 320 elephants have died in the country because of this, with Assam and West Bengal having the highest number of deaths. Fortunately or unfortunately, during the lockdown period, we've not had much cases of train hits because they've been not trained, the trains have not been flying. But on the other hand, the number of cases of electrocution of elephants have increased in the last 6-7 months, because as more and more people, especially from the labor working class, have returned back to their homes because of the lockdown, there is an immense requirement for more land to be brought under cultivation because they have to sustain themselves. And as a result, there have been a huge amount of cases which are actually coming out in the last 6-7 months of elephant deaths due to electrocution. There are forests which are being converted into tea and coffee plantations. A lot of these elephant corridors or elephant habitats, they are found in the coffee estates, cardamom estates, rubber estates, which are important connectivity for wildlife as well. And of course, a massive area coming under cultivation. This is one image from Garo Hills, Meghalaya. As you can see, there are forests in the background, and there is this Jhum land, which is in the foreground. So these kind of factors are there which are affecting elephant habitats today. More than the physical hindrances, there's also a perception of people towards elephants, which is actually causing a hindrance to their rite of passage. So if you see this image on the left, which is of mob throwing flaming tar balls and firecrackers at an elephant mother and calf pair in Bakura, West Bengal. So this kind of images, these kind of situations we are encountering where people are actually chasing elephants, screaming on elephants, using different means to drive away elephants. So this tolerance level which we had is also now dwindling, which is another reason why this particular issue needs to be addressed. Human-elephant conflict is a very serious issue in our country. As you can see from the stats, close to 500 humans, they die every year on an average, as opposed to 100 elephants which die. Around 500,000 families get affected and close to 1 million hectares of crop get damaged. So it's not just an elephant issue, it's a people's issue as well. So when we talk to the governments, this is what we try and make them understand, that this is as much as a people issue as it is of wildlife issue or elephant issue in particular. So the long-term solution which we have been implementing through our project since the early 2000s is to manage wildlife corridors, because globally also, if you have seen academicians or conservation practitioners, they have actually realized the importance of connectivity conservation and protection of critical habitats outside protected area network. And this is something we've been running for last 20 years, this project. This is just a basic representation of what a corridor is. There are two bigger patches of forests here. It is connected by this narrow passage. This is one of the corridors in Kerala. And you can see there are disturbances on both sides of it. So if there are further fragmentation, this particular connectivity will get lost, which facilitates movement of elephants between these two viable habitats. Why corridors are important? Because we have established earlier that elephants need to keep moving, so it helps provide connectivity between important habitats. It helps maintain the genetic flow, which further prevents inbreeding in the species. And it's not just for elephants. The elephant corridors are also very critical for other animals, like our national animal, which is the tiger. So corridor conservation actually benefits a whole lot of other species, not just elephants. So with this thought, we started our project in the early 2000s, where we actually surveyed 88 elephant corridors in the country. We came out with the first publication, that is the Rite of Passage Edition 1, which listed details on each of the corridors. And the whole idea was to make it available for policymakers, a conservation practitioner so that they can refer to it, see what kind of conservation recommendations have been proposed, and different authorities, different departments can actually make use of that and refer to that. We did another survey after 10 years because we realized that a lot of disturbances might have happened in the last decade or so. And that use of better technology with the prior established understanding of corridor conservation, we came out with plans which were more detailed. We could have plans which are more detailed, and we are still in the process of updating this because it's a dynamic process. The landscape changes almost every 6 months, so we need to keep updating it. So this has been a part of a significant component of our project. So now this is the research part of the project. So you've established, okay, this is where the corridors are. As you can see, I've just given a map of where the corridors are located, with southern India having the highest number of corridors. So this is the survey part of it, where you've come out with a publication, okay, that where the corridors are, what we need to do. Simultaneously, we've also started initiatives to actually secure those corridors. So just to give you an overview, I've already spoken about what the threats. I'm sorry, I'm rushing because I am also running out of time, I think. I've already established in the previous slides what the threats to the corridor are, but these are just some stats. There are 60% of the corridors which have a national or state highway passing through them. In many others, there are canals, railway lines, corridors. None of these corridors have legal protection. So they're prone to encroachment and all sorts of other development pressure. But the starking revelation which we found was that from the previous list of 88 corridors, 7 of them, when we did the survey after a decade, 7 of the previously identified ones are now impaired. That means elephants are not able to use them anymore because there was lack of monitoring. There was nobody to look after them. There was continued land use changes. Because of them, we have lost 7 of these corridors. Some of the solutions which we work with the forest department is to try and first recognize these corridors before they can even bring it under various laws. If they are recognized, and then the next step comes, that is to try and see if there could be given some legal protection under various laws. We've put these kind of signboards in corridors so that at least people can know where an elephant corridor is. And we're also working with states to see if the corridor plans which we have come out with can be adopted as part of their state management plans. At the Wildlife Trust of India, we have developed 4 models, 4 approaches on how you can secure connectivity and basically how you can secure lands. It can apply to other kinds of lands also, not just specific to corridors. But I'm just going to give you some examples while I talk about these models quickly. One is the private purchase model, where we as an NGO, with the help of our international partners, we buy a critical piece of land. Now, land is extremely a sensitive issue today. What we could do 10 years back is not possible today because the land rights have become clearer to people. And this is a very sensitive thing of purchasing land. So we did this corridor work 15 years back. We started where we purchased a land of 25 acres in Wayanad, Kerala. There were 5 settlements which were inside the corridor, and we voluntarily relocated them outside the corridor. And now the corridor is actually part of the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary. After 10 years through a gazette notification, it got part of the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary in 2015. So we also gave some community support to these people because they were being resettled. They were built houses, they were given sanitation, they were given access to healthcare, medical care, and schools and colleges. It was better. So they used to stay in these kind of houses. We build them concrete houses, and we continue to monitor the corridor because it's important to establish a long-term database on how your interventions have actually helped. In the second model, the government acquisition model, we do not—
2 minutes more.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Yeah. So here we do not work directly, but we work with the government and we give them some technical assistance to do the work. So here it's more like a suggestion we provide to the government. This we have done in Uttarakhand. One very interesting model is the community securement model, which we've been implementing in Northeast, especially in Meghalaya, where the whole idea is to establish a bilateral benefit sharing model with the community. and to encourage them to set aside land as village reserve forest or community reserves. And in doing so, we have now secured close to 3,500 hectares, which have been protected as village reserve forest in Garo Hills, Meghalaya. The last and the most important model is what we realized is to take Gaja to the Praja. That is how you take elephants to the people. This we have been implementing through our campaign called the Gaj Yatra, which is the journey of the elephant. This actually aims to bring together everybody, all kind of stakeholders. As you can see from the screen, I'm not going to read them out. Uh, we build groundswell with stakeholders through spot campaigns. Children and youth are a very important part of this campaign, as there have been very interesting case studies, which probably, if there's some question answer session, I can highlight more on that. We are working with the linear infrastructure agencies to see if some of these recommendations which I've put on the slide could be incorporated in their plans. Just a small video, if you can see, this is a video from West Bengal. A loco pilot, he was alert enough to stop the train and take this video of the elephant of a tusker who he has saved. So if we can encourage these, we can felicitate these kind of loco pilots, it will actually be an example for other loco pilots also to be alert and do their bit. Similarly for highway, this is just a video from Kaziranga where you can see people are actually volunteering, forest department, police, they are controlling the traffic to let the elephant herd pass. So these kind of small initiatives also go a long way. Just to quickly sum it up, media has been an important stakeholder because you may say a lot of local media channels, they report elephants in a very negative way, which creates a lasting impression in people. Like they will have headlines like Rog Jumbo or Bigral Hati ne aake kuchal diya logo ko. So it's very important to build a responsible media so that they can report better and show elephants in a positive light, so which we've been doing through our workshops at both central and local level. We have a collaboration now across across 50 corridors, which we are
You
doing,
got
which
30
we are
seconds
implementing.
left. 30
I'm
seconds.
almost done. So we have this collaboration network of people who we call the Green Corridor Champions, because we realize that as one organization, as one team, we will not be able to do this. This is a huge vision. So collaborations go a long way, which we have done through our Green Corridor Champion initiative. And they have been monitoring, they have been doing local level awareness in each of these 50 corridors I mentioned, and a local level policy mobilization. Now, in doing all this, we are ensuring that the elephant is not stranded on our rooftops, and instead it has right of passage. Thank you so much. And with this, I finish my talk. Yeah.
Thank you. An elephant family of elephants, so little time. Sure, there'll be other opportunities, and maybe over the question session we'll be able to answer some more. Can we get Biplav on board, please? And we'll answer questions, Upashana, all together at the end of Biplav's talk. Is that right?
Okay. Yeah.
Biplav.
Yes. Let me share my screen. It's coming up. So I'll be basically,
No, let me first introduce you, Biplav. Let me introduce you. You're a man of many parts. You're an expert on many subjects. And of course, you're an old friend of mine. And you'll be about to talk about the plight of the Asian rhino, which is not very good, like that of the elephant, other than being, I think the only fate worse than being a rhino or an elephant is to be a Dalit girl in this country. So you have your hands, your work cut out. So please continue, and then we'll answer questions together at the end of it. Over to you, Biplav.
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening to the viewers. I'll be basically focusing, my presentations on the current status of Asian rhinos. We have, in Asia, we have 3 species of rhinos, and whereas, in Africa, we have 2 species of, rhinos. Where the African species, the black and white, are popular. People knows them much better. than probably the 3 species which are found in Asian countries. So among the Asian countries, we have India and Nepal, we have greater one-horn rhino. Then we have Sumatran rhino, the population you can see less than 80. And then we have Javan rhinos. Now both the Sumatran and Javan rhinos are the critically endangered species of Asia. Now, just to give you, a background about the different height of, the rhinos. So Sumatran rhino is the smallest, followed by Javan rhino, black rhino, white rhino, and the greater one-horn rhino. So with regards to, the white rhinos, which are found in the African countries, they are two-horned, and the current population is about 7,500 to about 18,900. So these are the countries, where these white rhinos are found. Black rhinos populations are slowly increasing after a sharp decline in between. And, you can see in the screen the countries where these black rhinos are found in the wild. And, these black rhinos, visibly you can see they are having two horns. Now, coming to Asian context, Javan rhino found in only one national park in Indonesia. I have been fortunate to work in Indonesia since 2008. I spent about 3 to 4 months in a year working with the local governments and local agencies. When I first started going there, the population was around 35 to maximum 40. And then, slowly, because of certain interventions that has been initiated, the populations are slowly growing. And if you can see the map, the left side is basically showing, the past distribution range, and the current distribution range where, you can see is basically, only in this little tiny area in a national park called Ujung Kulon National Park, where all the current 72 So what, the interventions we did, because we have realized that, the top canopy of the Ujung Kulon National Park was, covered by a particular species of arenga, which is called arenga palm. And that ultimately, reduces the entry of sunlight into the ground. So, because top canopy is covered by the arenga palm, the ground is always moist because lack of, sun penetration. And in the moist, forest floor, the arenga palm grows faster. So we did a small, experiment in the Ujung Kulon National Park by controlling some arenga palm and allowing light to penetrate. And then, that simple intervention has, enabled the food plants of rhinos to grow automatically. And that is probably one of the reasons why, the rhino population, Javan rhino population has now slowly increased in that particular, single national park in Ujung Kulon in West Java. Sumatran rhino first declined since 2010. In 2010, we thought probably about 300 rhinos, Sumatran rhino existed. But then, 2013 onwards, we realized less than 100. Now we say less than 80, it could be 20, it could be 30, it could be 40. This is the rhino, Asian rhino species having two horns. Generally when we talk about the two horns, species, we always remember the white and black rhinos, but we sometimes, not realize that, the Sumatran rhinos are also having two horns. Both the Javan and Sumatran rhinos prefer dense forests. As such, it is very difficult, to enumerate their numbers. On the left, you can see the past distribution range of Sumatran rhino. And currently, the Sumatran rhinos are basically found in the northern part of the Sumatra and also, in the southern part of Sumatra, and a small population in Kalimantan, in Borneo. Greater one-horn rhino, compared to the other two species of Asian rhinos, are comparatively successful. This is the only species that has been downlisted from IUCN red list category from endangered to vulnerable because of its overall improvement in population. So these are, the 4 sites in Assam. We have rhinos here, 2 sites in West Bengal. Then we have 1 site in Uttar Pradesh, and then 4 sites in Nepal. So these are, the areas where these greater one-horn rhinos are found naturally. Fortunately, because of stringent protections being rendered across, the range countries, India, Nepal, the populations are found increasing. Even if you see in Kaziranga during 1980s, we have 1,000. Now it increased to almost 2,400. So, you can see, most of the, sites, the rhinos are increasing. These are the two sites, Manas and Lau Khua. We lost rhinos because of prolonged socio-political unrest in Assam. So there is always a relations between the, prolonged socio-political unrest. Prolonged means not 1 week or 1 month. It is years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. So, during those disturbances, the criminal gangs of poachers always targets rhinos. But fortunately, we have started, putting back rhinos in Manas National Park. There are also plans to put back rhinos in Lau Khua since the situation has improved. Jaldapara and Gurumara is in West Bengal. Dudhua is in Uttar Pradesh. And then Chitwan and the other 4 are basically in Nepal. If you see in Nepal, the population increased. And then suddenly you can see here, it has started decreasing. Again, this has, a relation between the same socio-political unrest, because during those time in early 2000, Nepal also faced prolonged socio-political unrest, that the Maoist, the socio-political unrest, and that's, international gang of poachers, took the advantages because they realized that, during this time, the law enforcement agencies are busy for law enforcement rather than on rhino protections. But with better protections, you can always see, the populations are slowly growing. So this is a conservation dependent species. While poaching is a threat, we all acknowledge, because we feel bad when we see, a rhino dead, blood is coming out, no horns, but there are other threats too. These are the invasive species, the habitats. So along with, stringent protections being rendered, we also need to do a lot of work to improve, the habitats, because, some areas of, the grassland habitats where rhinos prefer to live and utilize, those kind of habitats are being, overtaken by some invasive plant species. So this is another, area of threat that needs urgent attention. Why rhino poaching bothers us? Because it impacts the rhino populations. It also impacts the morale of frontline staff. We generally develop a tendency, that whenever there is a poaching, we started criticizing the forest, the frontline forest staff. But we never, appreciate when there is no poaching for 350 days. So I think, that sometimes, or often, breaks their morale. So I think, a positive appreciations, and when it is needed, even to, point out the failures are very important. So it has to be in a balanced manner so that, the frontline forest staff can continue to, put their efforts to secure the futures of rhinos in the rhino-dense countries. But most importantly, we have seen of late, the rhino poaching, rhino threat has a relations with the national security, because of late it has been seen in certain investigations by investigation agencies that the rhino horns are also being exchanged across the border in lieu of arms, because rhino horns goes to a particular country which is not friendly to India. So they get rhino horn and they send back illegal arms to destabilize the country. That's why the rhino poaching or the illegal wildlife crime, wildlife trade should not be the only problem of the forest department. It has to be seen from national security perspective. Because the poachers are coming, with the sophisticated weapons, and the so-called, village level, poachers, they cannot afford to, have access to the sophisticated weapons. Rhino horns, nowhere it is safe. Even from European museums, it was sold, it was, taken away by these illegal traders. Over 90, rhino horns from European museums were stolen. So nowhere rhinos are safe, whether it is in wild or even in captivity or even, in the museums, because of these illegal demands in certain countries in Asia. But what is important, with regards to rhinos, fortunately, the range country governments, especially India and Nepal, has taken stringent measures. Nepal was quite successful in last few years with no poaching reported. Just recently, there was a report of, suspected poaching in Chitwan. The Indian government also, especially the Assam, within India, the Assam government, the West Bengal government, and Uttar Pradesh government took, proactive steps to protect rhinos despite the challenges, from the poachers. So I think, it is, with regards to rhinos, it is not as bad as probably compared to other animals. But I think what is important is that we also need to think beyond rhinos. Because of rhinos, there are some, positive conservation benefits to the grassland associated species. Bikramji already mentioned about a species called Bengal florican. Bengal florican nowadays are surviving only places where these grasslands are. And these grasslands are protected because of the rhinos. So thanks to rhinos, that some of the grassland birds are also getting protected. But definitely, the countries like India needs to look beyond, and based on these, some of the success stories, it can be further enhance, in order to protect the overall biodiversity or overall important other lesser known species, which are also unique to Indian, conditions. So thank you very much for, for your kind attentions. I know the time is very limited, so I, basically reduce my, my presentations so that there could be some time for interaction.
Thank you, Biplab Talukdar. That is fascinating. The amount of work that is being done on rhino protection. And, I'm going to open this floor now for questions. But can I start by asking you a question, which is how successful has the rhino reintroduction program, like in Dudhwa, or in Jaldapara, in Manas, how are they working? Is it working? Honestly.
I can give you the Assam perspective, since I have been actively involved with, the Indian Rhino Vision 2020, under which, the rhinos were captured from Kaziranga and Povitara Wildlife Sanctuary and put back to Manas National Park. We almost, translocated 20 rhinos. And then, from the rescue center, which is a joint initiative of the Wildlife Trust of India and Assam government, from there also around close to 20 rhinos were translocated. There were at least together, from both this effort, there were at least 18 new calves born in Manas National Park. So that means the rhinos have accepted the Manas National Park because they have larger habitat compared to Povitara, which is only tiny, 16 square kilometer grassland areas. So I think with regards to Manas, capture translocations was quite successful, but poaching took away almost 9 rhinos, compared to about 20s we translocated. So that needs to be, protected. But since 2016, again, there is no record of any rhino poaching in Manas National Park. That means, the protection system in Manas has also improved. So I think, this was quite, so far it is a successful, despite, a little bit of setback from the poachers' point of view. And as I mentioned, poachers who always take opportunities to hit. But since our population, especially in Povitara and Kaziranga, are increasing, we need to little thin up, the populations by putting it back to Manas and next probably to Laukha and Burhachapoli within Assam. And Dudhwa also, they have, developed a second site within Dudhwa National Park. And put, some more rhinos. So slowly it is increasing, but I feel Dudhwa needs to open the fences, so that there is free movement. So that they can only do when protections, regime can be further enhanced.
So, Biplab, just to continue with this, are there other areas that, don't you think that far too many rhinos in Kaziranga?
Yeah, but fortunately, the areas of Kaziranga has also been increased. There have been almost 9, addition areas being, put. So earlier Kaziranga was 430. Now it is almost coming close to 800 to 900 square kilometer. So I think, that has given some more space. But within Assam, as I mentioned, we lost rhinos from Laukha. Laukha, Burhachapuri dam itself, has almost 110 square kilometer, where, with better grassland management, at least 200 rhinos can survive. So we still have space within Assam, to speed up the translocation. But some of the challenges that we face is the procurement of the drugs, the etorphine. So those procurement processes has to be made easier by the ministry, by talking to Narcotics Bureau, so that, the translocation process could be faster.
Okay. This question is, before I open it, I just want to ask Upasana. Upasana, after so many years of working on the elephant corridor, what do you feel about it on the ground? Do you think you have made progress?
Yes,
or I mean,
that's actually also
struggling?
we are there. The struggles are still there, and the only thing where I think we've been able to, which was very important, was to bridge the gap between different authorities, because it's not just a forest department's job. So what we've managed in the last few years is actually catalyze a lot of communities and empower them, because now we've actually worked with the communities extensively in the last 2-3 years through our various outreach programs, and it's not just to make them aware, but also in a participatory way. For example, just a simple example, if elephants are coming in, I'll give you an example from North Bengal, where most of these corridors are they pass through tea gardens. So there are a lot of
Yes.
labor colonies there. So when an elephant comes, so earlier what used to happen is to a crowd which gets gathered, and people used to chase the elephant and do all sorts of things before the forest department could arrive, because the forest department is also understaffed. They cannot be everywhere. So these people are the first responders, and these people are the first ones who will get affected. So because of that, there were a lot of casualties being happening. So we've actually worked with certain community members. We've established these village response teams or tea garden response teams. And this initiative we have expanded to other areas like Dalma area in Jharkhand, or your Chhattisgarh area, where conflict is extremely high. So they now manage the crowd, they ensure safe passage to elephants. So in a way, that kind of coordination between department and communities we've achieved in few places. We still have a long way to go.
Do you think that the laws that exist in this country are adequate and are not really, the problem is in the implementation of the law rather than the lack of law?
There is, of course, problem in the implementation of the law. As we can see, the existing protected areas also are not safe. They are getting decentralized. So how do you ensure the corridors which are not at all in the legal ambit yet? So it's a struggle, because the policy, but I would say that there's also, we've observed there are differences in different state governments also, the way they approach this topic, because we've had some fantastic support and examples from states like Kerala, who have actually understood the corridor concept, and they've imbibed this in their own state function to actually do this. So it's actually something which is not uniform when it comes to state governments working for it. But at the policy level, yes, there is still a lot of things which need to be considered when it comes to elephant corridors and
I'm now inviting people among the listeners to ask a question from either three of us. And there'll be some questions that hopefully all three of us will be able to answer. So the floor is open, and Vijay Lakshmi, I await the first questions.
Bikramji, you mentioned that you'll have to leave a little early. So I'll ask, if it's okay, can I put a question to you, please?
Yes, of course.
How have the bird monitoring projects in India helped to show how the habitat of these larger animals changed? Are there indicators that how important are the indicators that these birds give us to show that there's been a habitat degradation for the larger animals whom we are so obsessed with?
Yes, but like I said earlier, we are getting upset with the loss of large mammals or large animals. And when birds get hammered, we are really not interested. You see, birds are actually very, very good indicators of the state of the land. I'll just give you at random. The osprey doesn't exist where the water is bad. Once you see an osprey, or you see an Indian skimmer, which is a bird which lives on rivers and large water bodies, if you see them, you can more or less rest assured that the water bodies are doing fine. My friend Bittu Saigal and I constantly have a fight. He says, when I save my tigers, I'm saving your birds. He's 50% correct or 80% correct. But there are large tracts, for instance, the Desert National Park, which is the last bastion of the great Indian bustard, less than 100 left. I spent years there. I can fight. But even if we quibble with 100 or 200, it's 2,000 too little. But the point is that the path of the tiger and the path of the great Indian bustard has never ever crossed. It is true, there is very, very little that is done to preserve birds per se. You might have a Bharatpur, right? You might have a Chilika. But that's about it. So to say that when we say big mammals, we say birds, yes, there's a certain amount of truth in it. But there's very little or very small modicum of truth. When we say birds, we save animals. So that is the dichotomy of saving Indian birds vis-a-vis saving Indian mammals.
Thank you, sir. One more question. The Science Journal published an article 2 days back saying it was a report on a study on crows. And they showed that crows exhibit a higher level of sensitivity and consciousness than was believed before, and it was almost equal to primates. So what are your comments on animal consciousness and human consciousness?
Is a great, great bird. It is commensurate on man. You don't see house crows where there are no human habitation. It lives off human waste. Hugely successful, but it's a high of crows. Jungle crow, the large-billed crow, now has been broken up into various different species. But that notwithstanding, it is completely true that the crows have a much higher survival rate because they're not specialist feeders. They'll eat almost anything. They're great raiders of nests, and they're very, very clever. It's not these birds that worry me, it's the simpler ones like the house sparrow, which has shown a tendency to disappear. Disappear, why? No study has been done. And the question is, whose job is it to study? Is it your job? Is it my job as an individual? Is it Biplob's job as an NGO? Is it Upasana's job as an NGO? Or is it the government of India's job as the authority of all things living? No studies have been done, so there's speculation. Somebody says, telephone towers. Somebody says concretization. But no real study has been done because the interest does not lie. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic about it, but the point is that nobody's interested whether the sparrows or not. I just gave you an example during my talk that China, one day Mao Zedong decided these pests, sparrows are pests, and it eat away so much. Right? So he ordered that anybody who kills a sparrow brings it will get X amount of money. So all the sparrows disappeared. Because they disappeared, mosquitoes and other small insects started growing because there was no control over them. And a time came when they had to import sparrows back into China. So there are long-term effects, but we are not interested. You ask a forest officer, bhai sparrows mar rahe hain, he'll say, to kya ho gaya? That's the level of his interest. Not only sparrows. How does it matter? I teach at the IIT in Kanpur. The worst question that I've ever asked, and I'm asked very often, how does it matter if the tiger disappears? Does it interfere with our money making? I said, I can give you 100 scientific reasons what will happen. If the tiger disappears, the population of grazing animals like the spotted deer will increase, your crops will get, they're not even interested in that. They ask a basic question, they itna halla kar rahe ho, ro rahe ho, peet rahe ho, this is happening, beating your chest, you're doing that. Tiger has disappeared. How does it matter? To our getting a H-1B visa and going to America and leading this wonderful life. And this is IIT Kanpur, the highest echelon of study in India. So most people are not interested, but the future lies in the hands of the children. The only hope you have are the children. When I speak to children, I speak to thousands of them every month. They are the brightest and they are the most useful. What shall we do? Nothing. You don't have to do anything. Just tell your parents that you don't need such a big car to go from X to B. You can do it in a small Maruti. Don't tell your parents that they don't need to put the AC on 1 hour before to cool the room. Tell your parents they don't have 50-minute showers. They can bathe in 2 baltis of water, if not one. These are the small things which add up. And this is where we are failing. We have failed to carry our children. There are some schools, Sri Ram, there's Modern, I speak to all of them, who within their own volition, from their own initiative, are putting children involved in environment. Then unless you start at that age, the battle is already lost. It'll be lost much faster. Any other questions for Upasana and for Biplab?
Thank you. I see.
I think we are running out of time.
So that's fine. Thank you very much, Upasana. Thank you very much, the organization. Thank you very much, Biplab, for coming and joining us, making this such an enjoyable thing. I'm very sorry, and on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to apologize to everybody for the lack of time. So none of us have really been able to say what we want to do, but that happens in every seminar. Time is always a constraint. Thank you, and join the fight today, all of you, so that we can salvage whatever we can. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
sir. All of you, thank you so much for being with us. And this is only the start of what we'd like to do, where we want to, bring each of you for a much longer time, so you have enough time to actually share with us what you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very kind.
Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.